So I'm back with my man Farris, the other Astro Dad, and true to form, since we're in Gemini, we've spent the last 35 minutes talking before we hit record, and I'm sure we'll have even more to talk about. So welcome back, Farris. It's good to see you. And
Yeah.
I'm just curious. We got a lot of great feedback from the last show. Have you received any feedback personally from either people you know or people that said, "Hey, I really liked it," or what's been your experience since our first show?
Yeah. So my family has given me, great feedback. My mom in particular is somebody who, she likes watching astrology videos and stuff like that. And kind of was, excited by the prospect of me, starting my own YouTube channel for like esoteric stuff. And when I told her that I actually jumped in and did an episode with you, she was, super stoked. By the way, my mom has the same birthday as you. So fun
Oh, look at
fact.
that little twin
Yeah.
action going on there.
Yeah, there you go. Right.
Yeah,
My wife enjoyed it. She thinks it's super cool. And Bree, who does a lot of the great work that
yeah,
you do,
yeah.
had a chance to connect with her, and she gave me really really positive feedback. So yeah, I mean, it's this is my first time like kind of trying to put myself out there in a non exclusively professional, like buttoned up kind of way, and the response has been favorable, and it's fun to do. I'm super stoked to be here. So yeah, so far so good. I'm excited to keep it going and see what emerges.
Good deal. I was paying attention to the comments while we were watching the show, or while I was watching the show, and they were just so positive. Like,
Yeah,
he's really polished. He gets right to the point. So, and that was only show number one. What's going to
yeah.
be up and to the right from here on out.
There we
Um,
go.
yeah. So we're talking about Gemini, and it's as we were talking before we hit record. It's a sign that I'm fascinated by in terms of this whole idea of twinning and reflections and echoes and just synchronicities, I think,
Hmm.
seem to happen a lot more frequently when Gemini is in play. Things happen very fast. There's kind of a strange attraction with
Hmm.
Gemini. So I really like all of those things. Um, and this whole idea of doubling and twinning and echoing has always been very interesting to me. Like, events that happen on the same day but years apart, I've
Yeah.
always found to be really, really fascinating. But unlike you, I grew up without any siblings, which is what Gemini is known for.
Yeah.
And you grew up with siblings, and then you have two children, one on the way, so you're also raising siblings.
Yeah.
And what was that like for you? And where are you in the sibling chain? Like, how many
Yeah. Yeah.
are there? And
So it's a bit of a unique situation. I mean, I have three siblings all told, and I'm the oldest by 8 years old, right? So my youngest sibling is 13 years my junior, and then my eldest sibling is 8 years my junior. So there was a great deal of I don't want to say a great deal of maturation, but in terms of a gap, there was a significant maturation gap there, and you know, I I love being a big brother. So anyways, I say that the gap obviously insinuates that there wasn't a whole lot of the Bickersons, wasn't really going on with me and my siblings. It wasn't a whole lot of competing for the same types of attention and, like the same types of toys and, all that kind of stuff. So there was a little bit of separation and maybe with the traditional like sibling rivalry or,
right.
nature. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think I alluded to it in our last episode, but like I really am a family oriented sort of ethos. My I was imbued with that myself, and we try and put that into our kids. And I love being a big brother. It was one of those things that I was a single kid for a long time, obviously for 8 years, and always remembered wanting to have siblings. All of my siblings are half siblings, so that's another unique aspect about it.
Yeah, that's
My
interesting.
parents got divorced, remarried, and then each started new families. Um, so yeah, it's been a super fun and positive experience. Watching them grow up and kind of making some mistakes for them so that they could take a cautionary tale from their older brother. And thankfully,
Right.
I'm not what you'd consider to be a fuck up. So, but yeah, no, I think there's a lot of aspects to the sibling life that you know well, on one hand too, I will say that a being the sole product of my mom and dad, and then having them go off and get remarried and stay married and all that stuff, kind of gave me a unique vantage point, right,
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
appreciate and observe and just have relationship with all parties involved. So yeah, it's definitely been a unique experience, but certainly thoroughly enjoyable.
And now you have two children, siblings,
Yeah.
one on the way, and
Hmm.
um, boy, girl. So what's that like? Uh, Being a parent to them and managing their worlds, which are I would assume very different and on many different levels.
Yeah. So just a fun side note too. My daughter will be 8 years old when the next baby is born. So 8 years will
Interesting.
separate. So similar there. Another little twin action. Um, but I think one, the way like my dad, for example, raised me, but more my brother and sister. So my dad had a boy and a girl, my brother and sister, and then my mom and stepdad had a daughter. Um, like the way, like whenever my younger brother and sister with my dad would like start to bicker or have issues and problems, he would be like, "Leave each other alone. Go in another room." It was just don't address it. Don't you know what I mean? Just leave each other alone. And I will say that kind of observing their relationship as adults now is kind of interesting, right? It's almost like two people who have had plenty of issues that never got resolved. You know what I mean?
Interesting.
Whether they be big or small. And so one of the things when I address things with my kids, or they're having a Bickerson's sort of episode, uh, I'm very mindful about like what happened. You did this, but why did you do this? Oh, because you did this, so you're both at fault. So you need to say sorry to each other, and and like within 5 minutes they go oftentimes go from being completely at odds with each other to really kind of having a rectified they're able to play again, right? And so
Right. Right.
that's one thing I will say is that typically I learned at a very early age that it takes two to have a problem, it takes two to have a fight, to have an argument. And so um, very rarely is it somebody just being 100% wrong. And it does happen on occasion, but I try to help my kids identify those moments where actually, like, what did you do to contribute to the problem? And so that's one aspect of it. I will say on the positive side, I mean, they are super close friends. They don't fight that much. I love that they have each other's back. They like doing a lot of the same things. They like to support each other. Like my daughter just had her second grade play, and my son kind of like would memorize the lines a little bit, through osmosis. He wouldn't like intentionally doing it, but like he would like help her with the lines, and
Oh,
stuff
that's
like
cool.
that. So it's just just fun, fun little stuff. And yeah, so I don't know if that speaks to Gemini much, but that I just gave a download of
No, no,
the
I think
dynamics.
it's good, right? I mean, because you're the adult in the room. You're playing the
Yeah,
mediator, and I think that's how it's supposed to work, actually.
yeah, yeah.
The thing about, and again, I have no experience in this world, but the thing about having siblings is that it's really sort of the first level of socialization,
Hmm.
right? Where you have to learn how to resolve conflict, you have to learn how to share, you have to see the other person's point of view, right?
Yep.
And if you have somebody who's good at that, like yourself, it can really prepare you for
Yeah.
life and a degree of emotional maturity. Now, on the flip side of that, in astrology, by the time we get to like the age of 6, theoretically we're starting to go into that third house,
Hmm.
right? And that third house is ruled by Gemini. So 6, 7, for some people will do the preschool and the kindergarten thing. You'll hit that at about 5.
Hmm.
But I would say sort of the major socialization happens in first grade,
Oh yeah.
and and a lot of times you're going to be 6, and then 7 starts to creep in. You get that first Saturn square, and that's going to put you in the third house,
Yeah.
right? Which is Gemini's house. And as a result of that, a lot takes place, right? You begin to learn, which is what Gemini is all about. And it's not just learning, the 3 R's, if they still teach those these days. But there's also this learning that comes about with, and again, it could have changed, right? But when I
Hmm.
when I was growing up, it was, very binary in a lot of ways. Like if you were good, you were rewarded for being good.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if you were not good, you were like in the corner or
Yeah.
put your head on your desk, or go see the principal, right? So that's where we begin to learn about duality, and
Yeah.
and we learn about like right and wrong, right?
Yeah.
And even through studies, like, there's a right way to do something, especially with mathematics, unless of course you're Terrence Howard. And then there's a wrong way of doing something, right? Proof of work. And
Yeah.
that's all very, very Gemini-esque. And it's in a lot of ways, for better or worse, it sets us up with our relationship with authority,
Yeah.
because you're dealing with a teacher who is either going to approve of your behavior or your work, or disapprove of your behavior or your
Yep.
work,
Yep.
right?
I think an important sort of add on to that is one, it's also the first time where your kids start learning from someone besides you,
Good point.
for the
Yeah.
most part,
Yeah.
their peer group and all the impressions that are poured into the peer group in
Yep.
various ways
Yeah.
start to kind of percolate back to you, and you catch wind of like, where'd you learn that? Or like, those types of things. And
Right. Yeah.
um, that's an interesting aspect. And it's also the first time for most young kids, certainly for ours, where they start to look at adults in authority, separate, like prior to this stage, like we were the authority, no other authority, like yeah, grandparents and stuff like that, but that, like, we were the authority, and now you're learning from a separate adult that we don't have jurisdiction over, like,
Right.
all that type of thing too. So that's another
Right.
aspect of
Yeah.
that.
I mean, that's why I said it sets, that model in the
Hmm.
third house, when you embark on that, it sets people up for that third party relationship with authority.
Yeah.
And it really, if you want to just carry that out, right, it takes you right into adulthood. And, you have a two-party system. You've got the right and left dichotomy, and it all starts kind of back there, right? It all
Yeah.
starts with that mediator theoretically between,
Yeah.
right or wrong, good or bad, and this idea that there is an authority. And for a lot of people, um, they kind of stay stuck there, right?
Yeah.
Like they kind of stay stuck in that. And I think, to your point, what you brought up is that these people that play the role of the authority are, in some ways, the parent extant or the absentee
Hmm.
parent. And so by relationship, uh, authority in the external world is still parental,
Hmm.
right? So if we're dealing with like a president, or we're dealing with a judge or a boss, or Bill Gates or whatever, we're still in that model, right? We're
Yeah.
still kind of in that sort of, you know, third party parenting model that takes on the role of authority. And what's interesting is that theoretically you're supposed to remedy that by the time you get to the ninth house.
Okay.
And when you get to the ninth house, again, supposedly you're supposed to learn like higher knowledge, and bigger models of the universe, develop your own philosophy, your own trajectory, right? That's where you're supposed to replace the models of authority that you were sort of indoctrinated into.
What
But
age what age is that usually?
well, I mean, it's supposed to be around 18 or 19, right?
Okay,
Like when you go to college.
gotcha. Yeah.
This is when you go, if you go to college. By the way, I have a whole theory about college and the chart and how we do life, which is completely wrong.
Yeah.
It's completely how we do our life. And we basically, to break it down, right? You don't mind if I do this, do you?
No, let's do it.
Okay. So we start off, we go into that third house, which is Gemini. We go through all the kind of the parochial learning and, whatever, right? Elementary learning. And then we have the fourth house where we absorb our emotional values from our family, right? So the
Hmm.
third house and the fourth house are kind of concordant with one another. Um, and then on the other side of the fourth house, you have the fifth house, which is where we find things that we love, right? Like whether it's a sport or a
Hmm.
hobby or whatever, right? And when you experience that, there's supposed to be a kind of aha moment, right? Like I really am passionate about this, and I want to pursue this, right? Whatever that thing is. And back in the day, long time ago, prior to the GI Bill, not everybody went to college.
Hmm.
Most people would acquire a trade, or and to do that, they would apprentice or go to a trade school or whatever that was. That's very sixth house, right? So you're basically going from the fifth house, which is childhood, play, learning, you know, finding a passion. And if you're smart, you'll find a passion and then you'll start to work on it,
Hmm. Hmm.
whatever it is. So let's say, I don't know, you were really into, in high school, you fall in love with stained glass, right? What you would do is you would go and find somebody who knows stained glass. And then you would learn about stained glass. You would get really, really good at it, right? And you would
Yeah.
have the tools to be a stained glass person. Or let's say you loved cars. You would go to that sixth house and you would work in a garage and become a grease monkey and learn how to turn a wrench. Or now you would even go to maybe like a automotive school, which is very different, by the way, than the ninth house. Or
Hmm.
let's say, for instance, you really liked cooking, right? Well, where would you go? You'd go work at a restaurant, or you'd go
Yeah.
apprentice with a chef somewhere, and you'd wash dishes, and you'd be a sous chef, and eventually they'd get you on the line, and eventually you'd get really, really good at it, right? And so the sixth house is where you acquire a skill. And then once you acquire a skill, then you can take care of yourself. And
Yeah.
if you can take care of yourself, you can take care of another person as well, which sets you up to be in the seventh house, where you can form a bond and a relationship with another person. And then what happens after that? Well, you consecrate that bond by going into the eighth house, and you consecrate the bond by having a physical union that produces a child. That's what the eighth house is about, right? And then it's all about the biological exchange and passion and whatever. Then you have a child and the whole cycle starts all over again. And then boom, you have a second house product, right? That's what
Hmm.
happens. Now you get to the ninth house. And the ninth house is your philosophical and religious training. Like that's what the ninth house is supposed to be about, right? You have a skill, right? But now you have a family, and your family has that philosophical or religious training. So it could
Hmm.
be whatever, Catholic Church, Christian Church, it could whatever, right? You're
Yeah.
supposed to understand how to be a better person
Sure.
and adhere to some kind of religious and spiritual law, so that when you enter into the 10th house, you're not going to screw somebody over, right? You're going to have scruples, principles, morals. You'll do good business. That sixth house and the 10th house are connected, and then you take your trade to another level, right? You have
Yeah.
everything you need at that point. That's how this is supposed to work. But in our culture, ever since the GI Bill and the GI started to have all these kids, right? So the GIs got to go to college on the GI Bill, but then they have all these kids that they want to send to college. And college has become a huge business
Mm-hmm.
post-war America. They're everywhere, right? And now, you want to go, you send your kids from high school to college. So what happens in college is that they will learn things, they get higher learning, or they'll learn how to be a doctor or a lawyer or whatever. And then they go from the ninth house right into the 10th house, and they skip everything else along the way,
Mm.
right? They skip the sixth, seventh, eighth. So what happens is that we send essentially highly trained chimpanzees into the world.
Yeah.
That's what
Yeah.
happens.
Yep.
And
Well,
that's why, if we really were to work the chart, right, you would find something that you love, and then you would do that sixth house thing.
yeah.
That's not, yeah.
Yeah. As you're describing that, I don't know, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts, but the first thing that comes to mind once you start that sixth house journey up to the ninth, and I guess and beyond, is Japanese culture, and how like the care like that they put into whatever it is that they're doing. They put so much care into it, and it evolves almost into a philosophy, of life, by the time they reach a certain stage of their life. And how like much I admire Japanese culture as a result of the care and attention they put into everything that they do. It doesn't matter if they're making pastries, man. They put more attention to detail
It's a
and
very
like,
Virgoan culture, isn't it? I mean, they
sure, yeah,
it's almost OCD, the amount of attention to detail, but it's true, right? And I think that that's probably the way that it should be.
yeah,
And especially if you have a really good teacher, and the really good teacher would show you, like, you got to take pride in your work,
yeah,
right? Like, it's really important to take pride in your work because it speaks for who you are. And then by the time you get to the ninth house, you kind of understand this on a much bigger level, much bigger picture. So you have moral instruction, so that when you have to deal again in the world of business, you're not going to be tempted to cut corners or cheat people, or you know what I mean?
yeah,
Like that.
sure,
That's really the path. But if you go back to the third house and we look at the ninth house as a way to remediate this idea of authority, right? Like the ninth house in college tends to serve that purpose in that model,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
right? Like, now I have the knowledge, I'm the authority. Um, but how good is that working in our society,
Right,
right?
right,
Like, it's
right.
not
Well,
working real well.
final thought on that is like you're the model you described too would not only sort of equip individuals to be more, capable and fortified, uh, and better humans altogether, but it would make a mosaic of society that you have more skilled practitioners, more trustworthy individuals. It
Right.
would create the fertile ground for a high trust, a high productivity society too.
Right. Absolutely. And, for a while, and I still kind of believe this, like, I think that people in this country should spend 2 years out of high school doing selective service.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I've,
And
I've mandatory national service. I've
yeah,
been a champion of that for a long time, actually. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So, and I think it should be broken up into military training and discipline, and then a year where you're working in the community
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
you're helping people, right? So you're getting sort of the warrior side of it, and then you're getting the service side of it.
Yep.
And then once you have those 2 years, those credits could be applied to whatever you want to apply them to.
Yeah.
And if we really wanted to, button this thing up, right, you would make that a requirement to vote.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, we're getting into Heinlein, was it Starship Troopers
Starship
territory there a
Troopers,
little bit,
exactly.
but
That's
yeah,
what we're talking
yeah.
about, right?
But you know what? I actually agree with it wholeheartedly. I think you're having skin in the game and a stake in the future, uh, culture of your society, and if you want to opt out and be kind of, not subject yourself to those levels of stress, then there are certain privileges that are going to be deprived,
Right.
like,
Like you don't get a
yeah,
say.
yeah,
You don't get
exactly.
a say. And
Yeah.
it's and yeah, I mean, it would, if we had a generation, one generation that did that, we could turn the country around in one generation if we did that.
I mean, so again, I don't want to get too tangential, so steer me back as needed. But I was listening to Dave Smith uh, comment. Somebody asked him like what his view or thesis is for how we turn this thing around. He's like, and I'm summarizing. I'm not even going to try and paraphrase. I'm just summarizing. He's like, collapse. Like unfortunately, there's just no person strong enough to no clique or groups strong enough to turn this ship right now, and we're heading for an iceberg. And from the ashes, we can emerge. But like I feel like that generation you're talking about it's within view, but on the other side of maybe some some catastrophe. I hope I'm wrong,
Yeah,
but
yeah. I mean, I feel like this is a good kind of segue to get back into Gemini,
yeah, yeah,
because when we talk about Gemini, especially with Jupiter and Gemini, it's almost like we're talking about pocket universes and
hmm,
bioregions and different you know areas existing within one specific or greater, like a lot of micro in the macro,
hmm,
right? That's kind of where we're headed, especially
yeah,
with Uranus and Gemini, which is going to kick in next year. And we talk about parallel realities and things like pocket universes. And clearly,
balkanization,
yeah, I think it's going to happen.
yeah,
I think it's going to happen. And for some people, their experience will be more, communal based and, based around values that, they believe in and adhere to. And, in other places, it, may look a lot more like Escape from New York, right? I mean, I
yeah,
think that that's quite possible to have those
yeah,
realities. It's kind of
yeah,
simultaneously. Um, so let's get into this idea of being the parent
hmm,
of a Gemini child, which I think raises some very interesting, um, it introduces some interesting factors,
yeah,
right? We
yeah,
talked about Taurus last month, and, you know, clearly it's a unique personality, right?
hmm,
Gemini is different, is just different, right? Your kid is probably going to speak fast,
yep,
learn fast, walk fast, right? They're going to exhibit all of these things very quickly.
yeah,
So if you're a, a parent of a Gemini child, you got to be on your toes.
yeah. Well, so one of the things that I thought was interesting, doing a little bit of research on this, is that Gemini is the season of the year where the sun goes from being at its peak to beginning its downward ascent of the most light, and
Right.
then trending towards the fading of the sun. And so it has that yin yang sort of character. It straddles the line of that process, and so it represents the duality and kind of the like you say, the echo. I think some of the things that come to mind for me when I think about like parenting a Gemini child is recognizing that you're going to have a curious, like you said, fast thinking, fast talking person, who's going to be experimental probably, and changing of their mind, and maybe adopting certain axioms at one stage of their life and abandoning those for others at different stages. And so just being flexible and being willing to sort of work with the changing energies that you're going to get, rather than trying to forcefully direct and, dictate, but just to be a little bit more like a palm tree in a storm rather than, a
Yeah,
different kind of tree that breaks.
I think the best strategy to parent a Gemini child is to just kind of guide it, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
find out what they're interested in and what they're curious about, and kind of feed them that,
Yeah.
and interact with them, in terms of what they're learning or experiencing. I think that's probably the best strategy. I think the hardest strategy, or the hardest thing that a parent has to do with a Gemini child, is to set boundaries,
Mm-hmm.
because they're very clever,
Mm.
and they learn how to navigate the world uh, quickly, and based on language and what's said and what's not said. Well, you didn't say I couldn't go there,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you're thinking to yourself, fuck, he's right. I didn't say that, right? That little shit. So they're really good at that. They're good at
Yeah.
figuring that stuff out. So you have to learn how to set boundaries with Geminis, which is
Mm-hmm.
difficult, right? They're little
Yeah.
shapeshifters.
Yeah.
They're ruled by Hermes, and they're tricksters. When I think of, I don't know if you remember this character, but did you ever watch Leave It to Beaver?
On the Nick at Night, I caught a few episodes on Nick at Night as a youth, but didn't like get as into it as like Beverly Hillbillies or the Munsters or some of those other ones.
So there was this character on Leave It to Beaver named Eddie Haskell,
Okay.
and Eddie Haskell is like a fucking Gemini, right? Like Beaver's mom walks into the room. Oh, hello, Mrs. Cleaver.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
You're looking very smart today with that dress. She said, well, thank you, Eddie. Right. And then the minute she would leave the room, he'd be scheming on something. Right.
Yeah.
Like that mask would come off, and it's like, come on, Wally, let's leave the pipsqueak behind. Right. And I actually really liked Eddie Haskell, which says a lot about me. I'm not sure what it says
Yeah.
about me, but I liked Eddie Haskell. I thought this guy's clever, man. I like him. But that's what Gemini will do. They'll have faces, right?
Yeah.
And your Gemini child might show up differently in different households with different
Mm-hmm.
kids. Like they could be one kid with one kid, and they could be another kid with another kid,
Yeah.
right? Because
Yeah.
they're very adaptable, and they tend to bond with who's in their environment in an almost sibling like fashion.
Yeah.
Fashion.
So very easily influenced, would you say, in that in that sense?
Um, well, it kind of goes both ways.
Yeah.
They're easily influenced, but they're also influencers,
Yeah. Yeah.
and they're very good at getting other kids to kind of play in their games,
Okay.
because Geminis are game players. They love games. Let's look at some of the traits here that a Gemini child would begin to experience. So I've got the positive and the negative. So the positive traits, by the way, we're talking May 20th to June 20th. And to your
Mm-hmm.
point, right, that's that solstice period where the
Yeah.
sun begins to go down. Um, so the positive traits, they're always going to be curious. Like your Gemini kid, the first word, or one of the first words they'll ask you is why?
Mm-hmm.
Why? 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 So get used to that. Because they're just curious. They're eternally curious. They want to learn, they want to know, they want to figure out how things work, right? So curiosity is going to be the number one trait with Geminis. Most cases, they're talkative. There are occasionally cases of Geminis, especially if they're twins, and there are cases of Gemini twins. So you'll find a lot of twins born under the sign
Mm-hmm.
where one twin will be more talkative than the other. So they'll kind of split the sort of the vocalization, and then they can switch back again. Gemini twins are fascinating. By and large, they're talkative. They're always bright.
Hmm.
Geminis are always bright. They're precocious. This is the part that if you raise a Gemini child, you know what I'm talking about. They will learn things very quickly. They will show abilities in certain things very quickly. Now, whether or not they can sustain that is another story, because Gemini tends to have a pretty short attention span because they're always on to the
Hmm.
next thing. Right? They tend to be agile. They can be very agile. They have good reflexes, and Gemini rules things like the fingers and the hands and dexterity, right? So they can be very, very agile. They show some ability with sport,
Hmm.
but they don't always have to. They may get bored with it, and they'll say, "Well, I'm kind of over that." Like, well, you were really, really good
Yeah.
at that. Well, I know, but I'm kind of over that now, right? That's one of the frustrating things about Gemini's is once you think it's a Gemini child is once you think they've locked in on something, that's the challenge, is to keep a
Yeah.
Gemini child engaged and not let them move around.
Yeah.
So why don't you stick with this for a little while longer and see where that goes, see where it goes. And I think as a parent, you kind of, that's, I don't know about you. Let me ask you this question, because
Yeah.
have you, either your daughter or your son, said, I don't want to do this anymore?
Uh, so yes and no. Yes, in the micro sense, where it's like, baseball practice, and I don't want to go, but not like, generally they still like baseball, right? Like he still like enjoys the games and all that kind of stuff. So, um, I, you know, I remember as a kid not wanting to go to practice, and be feeling like I was ready to quit because I didn't want to go to practice, but then thoroughly enjoying the fact that I stuck it out. And so yeah, I get what you're saying though, in terms of, I think one of the critiques of Gemini is that they tend to be more jacks of all trade, generalists rather than masters of a particular, kind of what you were talking about, like finding that thing that they like, and riding that from the sixth house up to the ninth house, not super Gemini in its orientation. um but yeah, as far as my kids go, thankfully they haven't had like a super overriding impulse to quit something.
When I look back at my childhood, and uh, my father let me quit things too easily,
Mm.
and I can give you at least four examples of that. And I wish he had pushed me
Hmm.
further to complete some of these things.
Yeah.
And years later, this is just a side note, but years later, my father would go into therapy, and uh, the therapist, who was pretty sharp, said that your issue is completion. That's what he said. Your issue is completion. So vicariously, I was dealing with my father's incompletion issues.
Hmm.
So when I was a father of a kid that I had the ability to have some decision making over, I didn't let him quit things.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember one time he was really into MMA, or he was doing MMA when he was young, and he said, I think I want to quit. I didn't want to let him quit, but I didn't
Yeah.
get heavy with him. I don't know how we massaged it, but we got him back in, and he was fine.
Yeah.
But I was like, no, you're not going to quit, right? I'm not going to
Right.
let you like bail out on stuff. And I think with Gemini's, that's the challenge,
Yeah.
is to keep them kind of on one track. So I think the if you can, they show a proclivity for something. I think the thing to do would be to introduce new layers of complexity, right, and challenge them a
what
little bit.
what sorry if this is tangential, what was David Bowie? Do you know what his sign was off the
He's a
top of your head?
Capricorn. Capricorn,
Capricorn. Okay.
born
Okay.
January 8th, the same shares the same birthday as Elvis.
Oh, okay.
And he's
Wow.
an Aquarius rising.
Okay.
I
Okay.
know David Bowie's chart very well.
Okay. Because, I see the word experimental, and as you're talking about, sort of the, keeping focus, which obviously is crucial to developing real expertise and proficiency, and offering a particular value to society and the economy and all this kind of stuff. But balancing that with the experimental piece where, they're kind of testing different ways and things to, try and see other alternatives that might work. That's where a lot of, I think innovation happens on those experimental edges.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on that, on balancing that with the
Yeah.
other?
Well, it's interesting you brought up Bowie because his fifth house would be Gemini.
Okay.
And fifth house is the house of creativity and pleasure and passion. And, Bowie's known for all these different personas.
Yeah.
Like he's known for Ziggy Stardust or the Thin White Duke or, you know, um, for Bowie, a lot of that is really born out of his fourth house because his mother was absolutely mad and she
Mm.
terrorized the household. And his older brother wound up in an institution and his father committed suicide.
Ah.
So Bowie had to kind of live with this absolutely mad as a hatter mother. And I think that probably create, and even like, his physical traits, he has one eye that's different than the other, they don't match. Um, so he's like, he does have a lot of Gemini quality to him. And I think that's
Hmm.
his fifth house where he's working on his creativity. But
Hmm.
the experimental part of Gemini is, willing to try like new things or different things or new approaches. And I think in that regard, Gemini is not, it doesn't have a lot of value that's placed on failure,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? There's no value placed on failure. It's like, well, let me try this. And, if I fuck it up, at least it's interesting. Right.
Yeah.
And I may get something out of it by fucking it up. So I think that's the experimental component
Okay.
that Gemini has. And they're actually really good with science in that regard. Because if you're going to be a scientist, especially if you're like in the behavioral sciences, and I'm not talking about psychiatry, although that could enter into it, you have to be willing to use animals
Mm.
as models for your experiments, right? And not a lot of people can do that,
Yeah.
but I think Gemini is one of those signs that can do that because they have this ability to detach and observe what the other part of them is doing. It's fascinating how
Yeah.
they do this. So that I think that sets them up pretty well with science
Hmm.
because they're able to do that. What else do we have here? They're communicative. We know that they're playful. Gemini's playful. They're playful. They're like monkeys,
Hmm.
in that regard. Monkeys get in trouble because they're mischievous and there's a bit of mischief with Gemini. It's ruled by Hermes, who's a trickster. So you get these trickster traits with Gemini,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
they like to pull the table out from under you, and get a good laugh while they're doing it. Um, they can be very facile with language, which means that if you get them early enough, they can probably learn more than one language.
Hmm.
So if you have a Gemini child and you want to get them into like a Spanish immersive program or French immersive program or Chinese or
Hmm.
whatever, they'll probably do pretty well because that's
And
how their brain is wired.
would you say that like music would fall under a language that they might be, attuned to, for pun intended?
Yeah, I mean,
Or
maybe
like,
I think so. I think that there could be
yeah.
some interesting relationships with music. I feel like an instructor would be really helpful
Hmm.
if you have a Gemini child and they want to learn music because it's that other, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And if they're
Yeah.
learning like tablature or the fretboard, they could mirror that, right? Look at what I'm doing. Or look at what
Yeah.
I'm doing. They could
Yeah.
look at it and go, okay, I can roll with that. Um, I'm trying to think of some Gemini musicians off the top of my head. Miles Davis was a Gemini,
Okay.
and Miles was really interesting when it came to music. One of the things that he did during the like mid late 60s, early 70s, he surrounded himself with these really young, extremely talented musicians. And Miles wasn't afraid of like their ideas or their
Yeah,
virtuosity.
being
He
disrupted, maybe.
Yeah, he liked it. That's the thing about Gemini is that they're always in search of new ideas.
Yeah,
And so these guys were bringing new ideas to Miles sound, and he really liked that. He didn't have any problem. And for those guys to play with Miles, are you kidding?
yeah,
It was like a
yeah.
dream come true for them because they were, playing with one of the great jazz masters. But Miles was very mischievous, man. He was very, there's this story about Miles Davis where, he's a big cokehead and back in the
Mm.
day. And he went to this woman's house to his apartment in New York to score coke, and he didn't have any money, right? So he wanted her to front him like an eighth of an ounce or something, and she wouldn't do it, right? She wouldn't do it. It's like, come on, Miles, come on, you already owe me money, get out of here, whatever. So in New York they have the buzzer and the doorman and all that, right? So the doorman buzzes and says, Miss so and so, so and so is on his way up, and he knew that was her boyfriend, right?
Okay.
And so he gets on her bed and he starts to take his pants off, and she's like, Miles, you son of a bitch, and she threw him a quarter ounce or whatever. Get the fuck out of here, right?
Oh,
Yeah,
that's legendary right there. That's the
that
stuff legends are
is
made
your
of.
trickster right there. It's like
Yeah,
I'm gonna get what
yeah.
I came for. Prince is a Gemini, right? And
Yep,
and
yep.
Prince is, he's precocious, right? He's a freaking prodigy
Yeah,
as a kid. He's like amazing. And he gets a record deal with Warner Brothers by the time he's 17. Puts out two records that are marginally okay, but then he explodes, right? But he's a Gemini. He's always changing like his sound. He changes his
hmm,
sound almost from record to record. I mean,
yeah,
even uh, Dirty Mind and Controversy kind of sounded like, but they don't, right? Like Controversy is like tighter, more finished. Dirty Mind is just dirty, funky, punky, right?
yeah, yeah.
The problem with the challenge with Prince, and I think this is what happens with a lot of Geminis, is the attention span, and he'll just burn through whatever, right? And he'll create a lot of material, but is all of it good?
Right, right.
And I think most people would say that the majority of his catalog is better than most of his catalog, right? But Prince has got some clunkers. He's got some stinkers, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Everything he didn't touch was gold.
yeah,
Paul McCartney. And what's weird about Paul McCartney is whenever we talk about Paul McCartney, we're talking about two Paul McCartneys, right?
yeah,
We're
yeah.
talking about the
Well, you're
original
talking about
and then
yeah.
fall, right?
Okay, okay, yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
No. You go ahead.
Well, I was just going to riff a little bit on Paul McCartney and how not so much Gemini, but just how the songs that I love of his that are just absolute all time greats, and then they're like other times he's just like uh, clownish. You know what I mean? Other times he's just it's hard to it's hard to even get down with anything he's got going on. And so yeah, just a tale of two. I don't if he, is he Gemini? I don't even know.
Well, I mean, yes. I mean, whoever is
Yeah.
right supposed to be Gemini,
Right.
but
Right.
we
Right.
talk
Right.
about two Pauls. Like there's two
Yeah.
Pauls. And even from like a musical output, he does Ebony and Ivory, right, with Stevie Wonder,
Right. Right.
which is a very Gemini song, black and
Yeah.
white.
Yeah.
right? The keys on the keyboard, and it's all about duality, but coming together. And so I think he's very much a Gemini, even if
Yeah.
whoever he is, right? Whoever he
Right.
is.
So you think he was actually killed, or?
I think he was, because there's just way
Yeah.
too many
Okay.
there's way too many discrepancies.
Yeah. Yeah.
Way too many. And whoever's playing him is probably the better musician than the
Yeah.
original Paul. But the
You
original
know,
Paul was probably a better songwriter.
that's one of those where, when I first heard about it, it was well before like the shattering of reality took place, society wide. And I it's what there's probably a dozen or so conspiracies that I need to go back and revisit with fresh eyes now that we're in the Hall of Mirrors, writ large. So I think that's
I
one of
went
those.
down the fall rabbit hole hard in 2011. Like,
Okay.
yeah. Yeah. I was like I was convinced at that time that if we could prove that Paul McCartney had been replaced, that it would be the string of yarn that would undo everything.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And
I mean,
I was probably deluded at the time, but somewhere in the back of my brain, it made sense, right?
yeah.
Because then you could like pull the rug out from under the 60s, and then, what else was a lie, right?
Yeah.
So,
Well, I don't know if this was came up in our preamble to the show, but like, the things that you tend to focus on, the deeper you go, the more it yields, right? I don't know if it's a matrixy kind of phenomenon, but I don't know if you're familiar with Chris Knowles's Cocteau Twins
oh yeah, right.
uh,
With the
series,
muses, and
right?
yeah,
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 yeah, and like it's on the surface level, it's like, really, the Cocteau Twins, like there's like this whole mythos underneath them, okay, and then he presents the evidence. It's like, wow, it really goes deep on these two here, So
right, yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's so the internet 10 years ago was much better for this sort of thing.
yeah,
Now, you just run into just pablum
yeah,
when you
yeah,
try to do any kind of reasonable search. It's it's kind of depressing, actually, that they've
yeah.
removed a lot of this stuff. Bob Dylan's a Gemini, by the way.
Okay, I used to
And
be really, really big into Bob Dylan, like big time. So yeah, I mean, obviously he changed quite a bit throughout the course of his
well,
career.
he's a
So
trickster, right? He has a Gemini
yeah,
move.
yeah,
All of a sudden he shows up at the Newport Folk Festival with an electric guitar in
yep,
the band. And he's the Antichrist to the folk movement.
yeah,
And it's a very Gemini move, right, to make. Um,
yeah.
and he's very facile with language, and although there's a theory that he didn't write most of his songs, the early songs.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the theory is that Leonard Cohen wrote a lot of his songs.
Interesting. Okay.
Um, Miles Mathis goes into this, and I don't believe everything Miles Mathis puts together, but he made a very strong case for Dylan and Leonard Cohen.
Okay. Yeah.
I
I
have to
mean,
say,
I love Leonard Cohen, and I mean, to be honest, I would be open to being persuaded on that. But my first reaction, and I don't want to distract the conversation, but my first reaction is that I feel like there's a marked enough difference between Cohen and Dylan's lyrics that I feel like they're distinct artists. But that's my knee jerk reaction.
he refers to early Dylan and
Okay.
Cohen, right? Like the first, two or three albums.
Yeah.
And then, by the time he gets to Blonde on Blonde, there's no more Cohen in the mix, right? So
Okay.
there's kind of a period, because the thing that he talks about, which I think is actually an interesting correlation, is that Leonard Cohen is really good at like biblical references.
Uh huh. Uh huh.
And those first Dylan albums have some of those in there, like what like what's it? Abraham said to his son, "Go
Yeah.
down the
Yeah. Yeah.
highway,"
God
right?
said to
Like,
Abraham, "Build
yeah,
me." Yeah.
like there. That's kind of in Cohen territory. which is what
Okay.
Miles Mathis is getting to. But it wouldn't surprise me, like when back in the day when I worked at San Francisco Magazine, the publisher of the magazine had this girlfriend, and she claimed that she knew the guy that wrote Dylan's songs. And now she didn't say it was Leonard Cohen, right?
Yeah.
But even back then, there was this, undercurrent that somebody was writing Bob Dylan's material at,
Interesting.
at the start of his phase, which you'll find with Geminis. You'll find a lot of rappers. Lots
Oh,
of
okay.
rappers are born under
Yeah, that makes
Gemini.
sense.
Yeah.
Huh.
All right, let's get into so they're facile with language. They're analytical. They break things down. They're very good. Geminis are very good at solving things. But the difference between Geminis and Virgos is that a Gemini can solve something and they're fine with it.
Mm-hmm.
A Virgo can solve something and say, okay, now let's apply this to the world to make it a better place, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
the Virgo is like, let's fix it and make it better. And Gemini
Yeah.
will say, well, I'll look at it and I'll solve it, but do I really have to do anything with it? Right. That
Right.
there's a difference. They're more interested in solving the riddle versus applying the
Yeah.
solution to the
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
problem.
I can see that for sure.
Um, the other thing with Gemini, we're going to get into some of the minus traits here. So they could be meddling, right? Like if you have a Gemini child and you have more than one child, I guarantee you they're going to meddle between the
Mm-hmm.
other siblings. Well, so and so said this, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And so and so said that. Well, what did you say? Well, I didn't say anything. I'm just telling you what so and so said, right? And that they're kind of like that. They're kind of meddling. They can't. This is a negative trait. They can't really help themselves in some ways. Like Trump
Yeah.
is a Gemini, and he's got a bit of the meddler in him.
Yeah.
Like he'll put his foot in his mouth, and
Yeah.
so and I think a lot of it has to do with the fact they're just bored,
Yeah.
and they want to see what happens. They're interested in watching how the puppets on the marionette strings move,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Well,
They,
and oftentimes, if like you stir the hornet's nest, right? I mean, you're already kind of your thoughts are moving at a fast pace. It's like you're in a way you're inviting people to catch up to, even if it's through drama. You're kind of picking up the pace amongst within your environment, a little bit by doing that too.
it's funny, today's JFK's birthday, right?
Oh, okay.
JFK was a meddler.
Yeah.
He was a meddler. He, got in the mix with the mob,
Yeah.
and he got in the mix with the Israeli mob. He was a meddler, and ultimately it got him into trouble, right?
Yeah.
Like he was, he thought that he was, I don't know, he could outthink people, outmaneuver them, whatever, right? But that wasn't the case. Geminis can also be gossipy.
Mm-hmm.
This is the one thing that they have to watch out for and they can be gossipy in a way that is, you may not even notice it. Right? That's how clever Geminis can be.
Yeah.
And they can start rumors, and they can begin very subtle character attacks, by just a mere mention or the way a
Mm-hmm.
sentence is phrased,
Sure.
and by not responding to it, right? And the next thing you know,
Yeah.
people are running with it and they're filling in the blanks, and the Gemini is sitting back there looking, oh, look what they're doing, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So they can be a bit gossipy. And if you're a gossip columnist, well, that's not a bad thing. I'm not sure if this is a minus trait or a positive trait, but they tend to play the devil's advocate, and they will take whatever side you're,
Yeah.
the opposite side that you're on. They'll take
Yeah.
that side.
Well, I would count it as a positive, in the sense that I did the debate team for a semester in college, and one of the things like I reflect back on that as being so positive is that you had to master both sides of an argument, because you didn't know what side you were going to be arguing until the moment before the debate, and then you were assigned a side, and then you had to passionately and vigorously argue that side. And I think having an ability to step outside your personal biases and preferences and just understand at least what your opponent has to say, I think that's actually an under appreciated sort of value that I wish we had more of in society writ large. But anyways.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think it's a really positive trait if you're learning how to think critically, um, do like oppositional research or whatever.
Yeah.
But the negative side of that is it can almost be reactive,
Yes.
right?
Reactionary.
It's
Yeah. Yeah.
reactionary. They're just going to automatically assume the position
Yeah. Yeah.
because that's
Yeah.
how they're wired, right?
Yep.
And that goes right into the reactionary part. Sometimes they're quarrelsome.
Yeah.
That kind of gets into the debate part.
Yeah.
And
just looking to pick a fight, basically. Yeah.
yeah, they can be very quarrelsome. So again, as a parent of a Gemini, you have to kind of stay on top of it, and they can start conflicts inside the household,
Mm-hmm.
and sort of move out of the out of the line of fire, right? They're like,
Yeah.
they're kind of like that in some ways. So as a Gemini parent, you really have to stay on top of it.
Yeah.
Um, there's an impulsive quality at times to Gemini, although they tend to think things through more than we understand, right? They can be very clever in terms of
Mm-hmm.
their moves, but every now and then they can be impulsive. And sometimes their impulsivity can get them into a bit of hot water. Like for instance, Kanye West is a Gemini, right?
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you remember when they had the benefit for Katrina? Remember that?
Yeah. Yeah.
And he was there with Mike Myers. Like that's what I'm talking about, right? That's the impulsivity that I'm talking about. Like Kanye, you probably should have thought that through a little bit more. And
Just immediately you conjured the look on Mike Myers' face and his immediate aftermath reaction. Just it will never not make me laugh. But yeah, what a moment that was, and spontaneous, impulsive indeed. Yeah.
I wish he could have gone into the Wayne's World character
Yeah.
and come from that perspective. Shwee, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That
Well,
would
in
have
many
been
ways, the modern world today is more capable of dealing with those like kind of crazy, off the cuff, phenomenon. At back then, there was still like this buttoned up, like even a guy like Mike Myers, who's so funny and has so much experience with improv and all this, couldn't even
right.
respond in
He
that
could.
moment.
Well, it was just so. It was for the time. It's weird,
Yeah, it's
And I
so weird.
understood what he
Yeah,
was. I understood what he was saying.
yeah,
But that's that impulsivity.
yeah,
And well, he's been, shown to be impulsive other times along the way as well.
yeah.
Um, they Geminis can have what I call mutable morality. So they're very good at justifying things that they do or don't do, right? Like they're very good at that. They can make a very good case for, you know, being bad or
Yeah.
being what's the word I'm looking for? Acting out of bounds, right? So they have a very fluid sense of what's right and wrong at times. Um, Geminis can be cruel. That's another part that isn't often talked about, but they can be very cruel, and they can basically play people like pieces on a chessboard.
Hmm.
Like when I think of cruelty, I think of the movie Heathers, right? And I think of
Oh,
Heathers
yeah, yeah,
and
yeah,
the three girls, and they're not sisters, but they're kind of part of this cruel girl fraternity, which is
yeah,
very
yeah.
very fraternal, right? And they're kind of, they're kind of cruel
Like,
in that
yeah,
regard.
yeah.
So Geminis have that inside of them, but then they can go on the other side and they can be really angelic too. I mean, that's the thing about Geminis. It's like you don't always know who you're getting, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
At a certain point in time. And as a parent, I think that's a tough one, right? Because you don't want to allow them to grow up being a sociopath.
Yeah.
Um, so I have no experience in this area because I did not have a Gemini child. I had a Pisces child, which is kind of like its own thing. But I think you have to step in at some level if you have a Gemini child that can be psychologically adept
Hmm.
and cruel, right?
Right.
Yeah. How would you handle? I'm curious. How would you handle a child like that who is really psychologically adept and very good at manipulating people? How would you work with that?
That's a really, I think there's layers to this question. One, because I've stated on multiple occasions that I view myself as a parent. My primary role is not to guard or protect my kids from the world, but to equip them to manage and navigate and deal with the world. So on the one hand, not that cruelty, but like I remember, hearing stories about how Donald Trump's dad would pit Donald Trump against his brother and try and get them to toughen up and may the best man win kind of thing. And obviously, you mentioned Trump is a Gemini, and he can be cruel, right? Let's
I
be
heard
real.
Trump was horrible to his brother, by the way.
Really? Okay.
Yes.
Wouldn't surprise me. And so, on one sense, I mean, he became the president of the United States, one of the most successful Americans of all time. In one sense, like, you can leverage some of these because you're talking about like quarrelsome, mutable morality. These are things that as a parent, I don't want my kid to exhibit, but I also recognize these as a skill set potentially that people in society that I wouldn't classify as the best among us, but like these are things that can be leveraged to like get an upper hand in society, right? Let's just be real. So, um, you know, I I think cruelty is it's certainly not something that I would ever like cultivate in my child. If I noticed an aptitude for being able to like dig at people, and I would, like you kind of mentioned at the outset, like try to harness, because that, again, it's a skill set to be able to like find the chinks in the armor and stuff like that. So like, how can we push that in a way that is more constructive rather than destructive, maybe. Um, but I can't escape the fact that these are, again, these are skill sets in some regard as much as they are negatives, right? And a lot of attorneys use these skills to great effect, for example. So it's a tough question. I don't have a real good answer for you, to be honest, but these are some of the first things that come to mind when I think about that. um so yeah.
That's a really good answer, I think. I think that's a really good answer. I feel like you'd have, and I think this is the challenge with the Gemini child. I think you would have to let them know that you're onto their game, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Like, I know your game, I know what you're doing. And this is the net effect of what you're doing. And do you
yeah,
want to continue to do this in your life?
yeah,
Right. Now, the challenge would be for the Gemini to admit that that's what they're doing. Right. That would be the tough part. But if you could get them to admit that that's what they're doing, then I think you would have some ability to say, well, let's look at this. Why are you doing it?
yeah, yeah,
Why are you doing this? What are you getting out of it? When
yeah.
they could say, well, I'm just bored. Well, all right, let's find something that'll challenge you more. So I think you brought up a really good point, and trying to find a way to turn that into a strength so that they can be a healthy sociopath.
Yeah, yeah, right.
Yeah,
Or because I think sociopathy is just the inability to have empathy, right? So
yeah,
if you can, it's, yeah, or a quiet sociopath where you don't like, you know how to feign empathy, right? Even if you don't necessarily feel it inside, like, like it's expected that I, respond accordingly, because I get, you can't control how you feel. I don't know. Maybe you can train yourself to develop emotional, responses to things. But, if they are, if they are leaning that direction, you can kind of help them understand, like, this is how you navigate the world, given these, constraints that you may or may not possess.
I think it's difficult for air signs to have uh, fundamental emotional responses.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're not wired that way. Air signs are not wired that way. So what air signs do is air signs have mental empathy.
Mm,
So they imagine what that person would feel like versus actually feeling what that person would
yeah.
feel like.
Well, you said they're more able to, like, experiment on animals there in the scientific realm, right? So that,
Yeah.
that definitely kind of plays into that for sure.
All right. So let's just rip through this here. They have nervous
Yeah.
energy. They have nervous energy. Uh, it's hard for a Gemini to sit still, right? They're always kind of on the move, which just leads into being restless. They have a little bipolarity in some ways, right? They can, sort of show up one way one day another way, right? That's part
Hmm.
of the sign. And incompletion is a really big thing for Gemini. They will always have all these various projects that they're working on, and some of them just don't get completed. They'll have like four or
Yeah.
five different things going on at the same time, and that will carry through with their life, right? Would not be uncommon for a Gemini kid to be reading more than one book at a time,
Hmm.
right? They could read two or three books, but they may not finish. Out of the three books, they may not finish two of them, right?
Yeah.
So part of their challenge is completing things and sort of finishing them up and buttoning them up. And along with that is mental hoarding, right? We looked at Taurus as physical hoarding, Gemini mentally hoards. So they could have a huge collection of books,
Mm,
right? Or they could have a huge collection of DVDs or whatever. Like they like to have vaults of knowledge or vaults of
yeah.
things that represent, their Gemini persona, but it's usually mental, right? So and even things like information, trivia,
Yeah.
they can, hoard a lot of, useless information, right? Um, but sometimes even that can be a good thing. All right, so I have some Gemini professions lined up. So if you have a Gemini child and uh, they are looking to do something with their life, these are the things that I think probably fit their modality. So anything with the written or the spoken word is really good. So we have writer, journalist, researcher. They're very good at research. Um, Surprising how many Geminis are elementary school teachers
Mm,
because they show up in that third house. Scientist, which we covered, translator, if they have any affinity for languages, um, athlete, they can be very, very adept at sports and they're very nimble. They can be very fast. And so they have some athletic traits but again, keeping them kind of in the game and uh, focus, that's a whole other story. Psychiatrists, they like to understand how other people think,
hmm.
right? So they can be natural psychiatrists, and they're not like there's a part of Gemini where they're not judgmental, so they're able to work with some really fucked up people, right? Like,
Hmm. Hmm.
like, oh man, really? You had to hear that? In fact, I had a buddy in California who is a Gemini, and he was a psychiatrist, and his specialty was satanic ritual abuse.
Wow.
And this was
Wow.
this was kind of I mean, I knew it was kind of out there, but this was years ago, right? This was years ago. And I remember him telling me about it. And I'm like, you actually have patients like this? He says, oh, I have a lot. He said it's way more prevalent than you think.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. Right. And so he's a Gemini, so he can handle, this very strange world of SRA. So they're actually pretty good at that. Um, Analyst, because they're able to, cogitate information. Video gamer,
Hmm.
video gamer. Mishi, who sends out my emails and stuff, she's my age, and she is an avid video gamer, and
Okay.
she's a Gemini, right?
Very
So
fast paced, fast moving, all that kind of stuff. I can see that.
yeah, yeah. So if your child is a Gemini and they have an affinity for video games, you may not like it, but they may be really good at it, and they might be able to turn it into a career or profession. Programmer, uh, you could take that any way you want. Announcers, they're good. They're good at speaking, right? So they could be good announcers. Rappers as a career choice. There are a lot of Gemini rappers. A lot. Like Kendrick Lamar is a Gemini. Um, Kanye's a Gemini. I went through this list one time of all these. Andre was at 3000. He's a Gemini.
Okay.
There's all kinds of crazy Gemini. Tupac was a Gemini. So
Interesting.
I believe Eminem is a Gemini too, isn't he?
I don't
So
know.
yeah, I think he is. So if you have a kid that has an affinity for rap, there you go. And he's a Gemini or a girl, you can encourage them to be a gangster rapper. Um, I think they make really good comics because they're good at reflecting, Bill Burr is a Gemini.
Okay.
Do you like Bill Burr?
I like him a lot. Yeah. Yeah.
Funny as hell, isn't he?
Oh, he is. And he does a good job. I mean, there are times when he has takes that are kind of like but then like he redeems himself with something like classic and legendary, the next time I see him. So he's all over the place, and overall, he's probably one of my favorite comics of all time. So
Speech writers, they're good at writing, speech writing. Um, they're good at hairstyling.
okay.
And I'll tell you why they're good at hairstyling. Number one, you got to use your hands. Geminis are really good at using their hands, right? It's all part of the Gemini system, 2 hands, 2 legs, right? Gemini rules everything pretty much in the twos, mostly the lungs. But hairstylists are really good at talking to people, right? And, gossiping and hearing things. I've had a number of clients who are Gemini hairstylists.
Okay.
So, hey, it's a profession, right? They've got a bit of an inventive streak. So if they're curious, uh, con man, right? It's like truly, I mean, they can kind of flip scripts.
Yeah.
And I think to your point earlier, we can, you know, you know, elevate that into being a salesman or a politician.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're good couriers, right? Because they're like Hermes, they carry
Yeah.
information. So anything with delivery, right? They're very, very good at it. They're also good jewelers because it's precision work and it's working on small things, right? And Gemini is all about like the small thing. So they can be really good jewelers. They're actually really good spies, right? So if you want to be in the alphabet agencies, I'm sure they'd be happy to know that you're a Gemini. They're surgery. They've got surgical skills. Again, it's all that minute stuff,
Hmm.
right? And dealing with capillaries and nerve endings.
Yeah.
Like Geminis are good at that,
Yeah.
right? It takes intense focus, right? And then they're done, and they can go play golf. And map makers, things like surveyors, they're very good at stuff like that. Um, And I'm sure that there's more, but these are some of the you know the trades or the
Yeah.
occupations that I think kind of fit the model for Gemini.
Yeah, no, I mean, and I have my true node is in Gemini, so interestingly enough, I don't have any planets there, but I do feel like some of these, some of the stuff that we've talked about, attributes, negative attributes and positive, kind of map onto me a little bit as well. So I see it, I feel it. But yeah, I think Gemini is a fascinating sign for me too. I think you've helped me appreciate it with some of the analysis you've done over the years. But yeah, definitely one of the more interesting seasons of the year.
Well, I can see that true note in you because you have all these different skill sets
Hmm.
and you've done all these different things, right? Which is very Gemini like. And if you run across somebody who is a Gemini or they have a heavy third house, um, they have a lot of, uh, they'll have like a lot of certificates. They're really good at getting certificates.
Hmm.
Like, I just got a certificate in this, or I got a certificate in
Yeah.
this. I got a certificate in this. Oh, that's good. What are you doing with it? I'm getting another
Yeah.
certificate. Right.
Yeah.
They're always doing that. Right. So like they're into the 6 month program
Yeah.
or the 10-month program or the year program. Right. And they'll go in and they'll learn something and they'll go on to something else. They're good at that. Like, jack of all
Yeah.
trades sort of thing.
Yeah.
Um, and if you have a Gemini kid, like, it's good to understand that that's how they learn.
Yeah.
They learn in bursts. They don't learn in long tranches of information.
Yeah.
They don't have the attention span for that. So you want to give them as much information as possible over a condensed period of time and then, keep them moving, right?
Yeah. Well, to that point too, I think you have a leg up as a parent if you're into digging into this type of information, because then you can kind of begin to forecast or like anticipate some of the ways, like if your child is a Gemini and has a knack for being more of a generalist than specific on any particular skill or topic, like what are some things that you can put on their radar that were like generalists that lend themselves to having a general knowledge base, like what are
Well, I would
you
just say
can
have
you
them
can
learn as
incorporate.
many things as possible,
Yeah.
right? And the whole idea is synthesis.
Hmm.
And to, put it all together, all of its various and component parts. I mean, when I think of, I just keep coming back to Prince as
Hmm.
being this archetypal Gemini, right? Like he's always, oh, I'm going to do a movie now, right? Or, I'm going to do this, major 2 album Beatlesque epic record,
Yeah.
you know, and he's in that process. He's always learning something, right? And it's almost like the process is more important than the actual outcome. Like when you hear a song like Raspberry Beret, it sounds like a freaking late 1960s freaking pop classic, right?
Hmm.
Does he make it an entire album based on Raspberry? No, he doesn't do it. But he learns that and he does it, and so maybe he applies it to something else or part of something else later on, and that's what Gemini does, right? They'll
Yeah.
take bits and pieces of things and they'll kind of reuse them and bring them back and
Yeah.
and so I don't think anything ever really goes to waste. They'll find use for it somewhere
Yeah.
um, down the line. So let them be generalists. Let them learn as much as they can. Um, and I would say let them try to figure it out. And you may see them do career changes too. I
Yeah.
mean, that's the other thing. Like, oh, great, they're settled. They got this, good gig, and 3 or 4 years later, they're on to something else.
Yeah.
Well, I thought you wanted to be a programmer. Well, I really want to go study cooking in France. right? And you're like, really? Okay. And then they go off and they do it, right? And they come back and they're classically trained, and they get a job at a restaurant, and they get written up in a magazine, and they're making all this food, and then 3 years later it's like, mm, you know I want to make jewelry, right?
Yeah, yeah,
I mean, and you kind of have to let them do that, because they want to experience all these different facets of who they are and what they can be. And it
yeah,
might be frustrating and maddening for some people, but it's never a dull moment. You'll never have a dull moment with a Gemini. They'll always have something interesting. They'll always have something to say. Most of the time, it's interesting. Um, so if you have a Gemini kid, and have fun with that kid.
yeah,
Have fun with them. Just try to have them understand the consequences of their psychological actions and manipulations. I think that's the biggest thing.
yeah,
That is the biggest thing. Um, and to your point, maybe find a way to capitalize on it. Teach them how to
yeah.
go pickpockets or something.
Yeah,
Share the booty with you.
there you go. Have you ever seen the movie The Partisan?
I almost put it on the
Okay.
other night. Yeah, I almost put it on.
Anyways, the only reason I bring that up is because that's basically what that situation is. It's a guy with a harem who has all these kids that he's sired that are, little street hooligans. It's an interesting movie to say the least, but I mean, not necessarily a recommendation. Not the worst movie you'll watch though.
Well, Oliver Twist gets into that,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
All
Yeah.
these the street urchins,
Yeah.
the orphans, you know, and you have uh, kind of the main character, which is a very Gemini name, the Artful Dodger, right?
Oh
And
yeah.
and
Yeah.
the Artful Dodger is who Jack learns from, or Oliver learns from, right? And Jack Wild plays the Artful Dodger in the movie. So
Okay.
the Artful Dodger is very Gemini-like, and he and Oliver become like brothers in this gang of you know a fraternity of young thieves. So that's a very Gemini-like movie in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting because the David Lean version of that movie is really good. Like it was
What year is that, or circa?
I think it's from the 50s. I think it's around like
Okay.
55,
Okay.
right? So it's pre Dr. Zhivago, David Lean, but it's really well lit and everything. And a young Diana Dors is in the movie. I don't know if you know who Diana Dors is, but
No.
she was one of England's greatest sluts. She looked like Marilyn Monroe. Richard Dawson of Family Feud eventually married Diana Dors.
Okay.
Diana Dors used to have these wild sex parties,
Oh
and
wow.
she would videotape them all.
He was kind of a pervert too, wasn't he?
Richard Dawson, hell yeah, he was
Yeah.
married to
Yeah.
Diana Dors. Are you kidding me? She Diana Dors was a hot ticket, man.
What
But
wasn't he always like suggesting inappropriate innuendo to like the wives and moms on Family Feud though?
he was always there to give them a kiss, and
Yeah, yeah,
get inside their panties psychologically, right?
yeah, yeah.
Um, but the version of Oliver Twist with David Lean, um, Fagin is played by Alec Guinness, who is Obi-Wan Kenobi, very different kind of
Okay,
character,
yep,
right?
yeah, yeah.
And so in this version of Oliver Twist, Fagin, the way he's made up and portrayed. Do you know who the Happy Merchant is? Do you know the Happy Merchant?
No,
The Happy
I wish
Mer
I did.
the Happy Merchant is this caricature of of a Jew with a really big nose, and
Okay.
he's got his hands together like this,
Oh yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah,
Right.
yeah, yeah.
So Fagin kind of looks like the Happy Merchant in Oliver, and when the film was uh, shown and distributed, there was a very large outcry from the Jewish community for the portrayal of Fagin in this movie. So they actually
Oh.
had to go back and make him kind of less ethnic. But he's still like you can still tell like where Fagin is coming from, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
But it's a great movie, but it's very Gemini like. It's all about these young thieves.
yeah, yeah.
And this one guy who takes advantage of them, these young pickpockets. And the Artful Dodger is played by somebody pretty famous. I forget who plays him. Somebody pretty famous plays the Artful Dodger
Okay.
in that movie. Oh, who? Oh, yeah. Anthony Newley plays the Artful Dodger. Do you know Anthony Newley?
That name doesn't even ring a bell.
So David Bowie got some of his vocal chops from Anthony Newley.
Oh, okay.
And Anthony Newley had a very dramatic style of singing. If you listen to him, you'll hear what I'm talking about. So you can hear kind of Bowie's extended vibrato because
Okay.
he's picking it up from Anthony Newley.
Huh.
Anyway, that's who plays Earth. I don't know why I know this, but I guess I secretly want to be Gemini. Ferris, what do you got? You got anything else today that you want to bring to the table?
There were probably a dozen times I could have jumped in and steered the conversation into a whole new realm. But that great conversations with you as always. I mean, I think maybe one day we can have a variety show where it's a little bit more wide ranging. But man, jumping into these signs and viewing it from the perspective of a parent and how to make use of some of the natural characteristics and tendencies. What a fun exercise! It's deepening my own knowledge of the discipline, and yeah, this one was fun. So
So we got Cancer coming up.
yep,
Do you have any
that's
direct correlation with Cancer?
well, my daughter's birthday is July 6th.
There we
So
go.
yeah, yeah.
So I think that's Freeman's birthday too.
Oh, okay,
Freeman Fly. I think that's his birthday. So
it's a good
yeah,
birthday.
yeah. So you'll have something
So
to. You have a lot to bring to the table.
yeah, yep. Knock
You,
on wood. I mean, we'll be in the throes of it. We'll be planning parties and doing it in the throes of summer. But yeah, I'm looking forward to
should we bring her on and ask her what it's like to be a Cancer young Cancer
it.
girl?
I mean, you know what? And I think in true Cancer fashion, she's a little camera shy. In fact, her play, she spoke very forcefully and powerfully, but she, just kind of like wallflowered a little bit when she was on stage. I'll ask her though. I'll see what she has to say.
I think in closing, I think Cancer is a very underrated sign.
Yeah,
It's like one of those signs that doesn't really get talked about a lot, you
yeah,
know. But I feel like Cancer women are, very feminine, right? They're
mm-hmm.
really they embody like this real
The
maternal
nurture. Yeah,
nurture
yeah,
spirit. And Cancer men are incredibly handy,
mm.
right? Like they know how to do shit
Yeah.
and
That's
and
yep.
and get things done, right? So I think it's a very underrated sign. I'm looking forward to seeing you again in a month. You want to tell
Yeah,
people
me too.
about your business, which we'll have as a link
Yeah.
here?
Yeah. So again, yeah, I'm shilling slang and real estate, and happy to have real estate conversations with anybody who's, again, I'm not going to pretend to be an expert. You might be in a different state, whatever. But if there's just general macro level, prevailing macroeconomic conditions, you want to pick my brain. I'm happy to have those conversations. Um, I'm tinkering with the idea of building out my content creation, toying with the possibility of a newsletter, YouTube channel, things like that. So definitely stay tuned. I'll have more information hopefully next time around. But probably should pick your brain, Robert, on how I might approach some of this stuff. But yeah.
There are guys on YouTube who have real estate channels, and how they go
Hmm.
about their content is really
Yeah.
interesting,
Yeah.
right? Like, do you know this guy John Williams? Do you follow John Williams at all?
Where's he based out of?
I don't know, but
Okay.
he's really into kind of big economic trends. He has a lot of high level information that
Okay.
he brings to the table. He's got some kind of credit score thing that he has as part of
Oh,
his
nice.
product
Yeah.
base. He's worth a follow on YouTube, John Williams.
Okay. John Williams. All right.
And then there's this other guy, I forget his name. He travels all over the place. And he's very whimsical with his traveling. And he gets people involved in if they want to relocate. He helps them
Oh, cool.
with
Yeah.
purchases. He's
Nice.
very funny. I forget his, if I find him, I'll send you the link to him. So I
Cool.
think there's a lot of interesting and creative ways that you can create content that's
Yeah.
real estate
Yeah.
based.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I'm looking forward to it, and yeah, I appreciate. By the way, I appreciate all the good feedback from the first episode, and you know, don't hesitate to reach out. This is a fun community. I think Chattaria is one of the best you know, online communities that I've come across. Robert, you've done a fantastic job cultivating the right people.
I have nothing to do
And
with it. I have nothing to do with it.
you draw them in.
I have
You're the
nothing to do with
epicenter.
it. Right.
Well,
There.
either way, it's a good crowd. So hopefully, I get a chance to get to know some of you a little bit better. But otherwise, hey, thanks again, Robert. I appreciate the time, and yeah, look forward to the next one.
We'll see you next month, Farris.
All right, sounds good.